So once again, I'm Catherine Trisser from Common Cause Ohio. I'm the executive director. So what we'll do is we'll go through a little bit about like what we did in the last 2 months, because as you know, we ended up not doing this in October because we were super busy. So we'll do a little bit of an overview so you have a sense of like what we've been doing, and then a little bit about lame duck, and then I thought we should have some time to reflect on election 2024 and to talk about, well, where do we go from here, which of course is, really challenging. So, like I said, I am Catherine Terser from Common Cause Ohio. What we're going to do is go through what we've been doing in the past few months. And then what we'll do is talk a little bit about lame duck, because of course, the legislature will be back in town next week and they have some plans for us. And then what we'll do is we will go through a process where we'll just kind of talk and think about where it is that we want to go. And so welcome. So we're a few minutes after 8:30, so we might as well get started. First, I'd like to introduce Mia Lewis from Common Cause Ohio. Mia, say hello. And we also have Kelly Dufour.
Hello.
And Kelly is our voting and elections manager. I'm going to encourage you all to pop your name and where you're from into the chat. And then Mia, if you'll advance us.
Yes, and don't take offense, anyone. I'm just muting folks for background noise, and then later on when we are going to chat, feel free to unmute yourselves.
And once again, a welcome, a name, where you're from. I see Dayton there. I always struggle with Jayoga. It's for whatever reason, it never quite comes rolling off my tongue quite right. So I'm going to have to get this from the natives. Anyway, I went through. Oh, how do I say it?
Jayoga.
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 Jayoga. Thank you. I appreciate that, Garrett, because it's one of those that I've always really struggled with.
No problem.
All right, thank you and welcome. So basically, the way we're breaking this down is, what we did during election 2024, kind of the end. Then we'll talk about lame duck, and then we'll have an opportunity to kind of reflect and discuss and kind of think about, well, where do we actually go from here, and what are some options? And with that, Mia, if you want to move us along, I will take over admitting people into the room, so you don't have to worry.
Very good. Well, here's some pictures, folks. We had a lot of pictures. We had a lot of people doing a lot of things. Kind of the culmination of years of work on to try to ban gerrymandering in Ohio. I think this crowd, the Common Cause crowd, the Fair Districts crowd, the League of Women Voters crowd, we care a lot about democracy, and we know how harmful gerrymandering is to our democracy. And people, I'm just going to mute folks for a second. People put a lot of time and energy into this fight, and we are appreciative every single day of all the things that you did. And we did a lot. We did a lot. We made, you can look at it in numbers. We collected almost 200,000 signatures. We did so many trainings and trained so many people. We had speakers bureau and distributed yard signs and t-shirts, and we've had huddles for the past, this is the number between 23 and 24, but actually our huddles have been going on considerably longer than that. So, the thing that was really cool was that because Common Cause is part of Fair Districts, as Fair Districts, we essentially organized and helped facilitate a network of grassroots organizers and teams all across Ohio to collect signatures, to educate the public about gerrymandering and about the Citizens Not Politicians amendment. And, you know, that is something that will stand in the future. That those teams, those individuals, those volunteers, those teams, those networks, those distribution systems, those will stand for the future. And so, you know, the fight against us was extremely dirty and unpleasant, essentially just falsehoods about what the amendment was, perpetrated by Teresa Gavarone, Frank LaRose, Matt Huffman, those folks who were directly threatened by the concept of having to have fair elections. And so, you know, in the end, that proved impossible to overcome because it was genuinely confusing for Ohio voters. And so, you know, we didn't win it, but I really do think that this kind of effort that we did to empower and connect all of these volunteers and activists across the state who care a lot about democracy, that will have an impact in the future. So we are profoundly grateful. And we know what amazing things we did. And a lot of you are here and we appreciate you. And, you know, we will continue into the future. So that is that. And I will turn it back to, actually over to Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're also very proud of the work that Common Cause, along with other voting advocate organizations through Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. The work we did with election protection was really exciting, and we definitely had a lot of presence out there in the field. So our numbers, we had almost 600 people that were trained. We had that in 29 different counties. I think we serviced 7 different colleges with 63 different folks there on the college campuses monitoring elections. Almost 2,000 volunteer hours across 600 plus shifts. Our Peacekeeper program really increased in capacity this year. So there were almost 180 trained peacekeepers that were ready to be deployed across the state and actually working locally with congregations throughout election season. We had command center, great presence with our command center on election day and leading up to election day, where folks help manage the calls that come into the 866 hotline. We looks like on election day we had 291 polling locations in 19 different counties. So that's a ton of different exposure in different places, getting out there and making sure that folks are having the support they need during election day. We also worked this year significantly tracking the work at the boards of elections, so at the counties, and had 50 volunteers interested in tracking certification. We tracked that at 40 different locations, and certification did happen last week in all 88 counties without a hitch. On November 20th, they had an expedited canvass and certification timeline, and they all met their deadlines, and they were proud about that. We also tracked mass voter challenges throughout the season and actually since summer, and built a network of folks that are, you know, willing and interested to be out there at the boards of elections each month. Next slide. And then, you know, I guess over a longer term and maybe more in depth, we, you know, really worked as a coalition with national support, a lot of local attorneys that were helping to push back on the mass challenges, on things like last minute directives with Dropbox changes and some of the information we needed to get out to folks. And then also trying to make sure we could help protect naturalized citizens with the ID process during election day. So overall, we had 1,800 calls come into our hotline during election season. I think more than 600 of them on election day. They still were coming through after election day with people asking about, did my vote count? And, you know, how do I make sure that my vote counted? And so we know that it's important to people. We appreciate everybody that was involved, helping in a nonpartisan way to make sure that folks had the support they need and that we could report problems and help, you know, work on those problems in real time. So thank you everyone for that. Long lines. I see a question from Michael about long lines. So long lines were obviously problematic during early vote. We had, you know, a lot of concerns at those boards of elections since there's only one place to vote in each county leading up to election day. But on election day, there were some early morning long lines, and there were definitely machine issues that we heard about in the Cleveland area. After the morning rush and the early morning before you go to work voting, it did seem to level out and take care of, you know, throughout the rest of the day, even lunchtime after work, we're okay. We did not experience long lines at the end of the night.
All right,
Thanks.
well, I'll go on to back to you, Catherine.
All right, so you'll probably know that I care a lot about all of just the money that is in our election system, and that, you know, it's just, you know, pervasive. And, you know, for many years, you know, we would talk about kind of the corrupting influence of money in politics. And it's funny, back when I started, you know, we would be talking, sometimes we would be talking about $500,000 being problematic or $1 million. And things are really different. You know, we are more than a decade out from the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission decision that said that corporations can spend money on political ads, essentially giving them First Amendment rights. Then there was another decision, Speech Now, which essentially said that the money that is spent in these independent expenditures, I always love that because sometimes they're not so very independent from the candidates, that money, you couldn't limit how much people could contribute to those efforts because there wasn't a need to, because the only reason to limit is because of quid pro quo, and it's not going directly to the candidate, so there's no need to address corruption. Now, many of us can see the absolute problems in that faulty thinking or naive thinking or intentionally naive thinking, but this is where we're at. And so, you know, one of the things that we really wanted to do is to be able to look at, you know, well, what is actually happening in an election? And then the really vulnerable election of the Ohio Supreme Court, which is why we started, you know, Judge the Ads, which is judgetheads.org. And so we looked at the money that just impacted those races. And we also spent time encouraging people to think about, you know, well, why is money spent? It's spent on these ads. Let's make sure that people are more aware of, like, well, how do you dissect things? And so the Judge the Ads project has a couple different prongs. And Mia, if you're willing to move us forward. We did this animated video where we encourage people to look at, all right, well, what about the citations? Are they actually accurate? We encourage them to look at, you know, the disclaimer at the end, you know, hey, does this in fact, do I have any idea who this organization is? You know, so many of these names, you know, Ohioans for a Healthy Economy, you know, could be anybody. And so, you know, the editor that we worked with, I kind of love this, that he was like, I'm working off a lot of bad karma. So that for many years he'd made political advertisements. And so Mia, if you'll move us ahead. Now, one of the things that we do know is that the Republican state leadership committees, it's called the Judicial Fairness Initiative, spent big money. And then so did the Chamber of Commerce's Ohioans for a Healthy Economy. and then the newly arrived Freka PAC. Now, what's interesting, I think what's interesting about some of this is you have Ohioans for a Healthy Economy, which is the new affiliate of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. The Ohio Chamber of Commerce first basically ran independent expenditures in 2000 with their Citizens for a Strong Ohio. And they've always used that kind of buffer of an affiliate so that it's not always clear that it's Citizens for a Strong Ohio or Ohioans for a Healthy Economy, then in fact, we're talking about the Chamber of Commerce. And so there's that kind of buffer. And then there's the truly we have no idea where the money actually came from. So one of the things that's interesting, Freka is a local guy, first kind of time really getting engaged in these things. And I think it's important when we think about these races and how money influences our state elections, that there is a whole web of nonprofits that are highly connected that are impacting elections around the country. And so Mia, if you'll move to the next page. So those are the conservatives. We are now moving to the groups that back the Democratic candidates. So Ohioans for Judicial Integrity and Ohioans United for Public Education were two new actors for this election. And I think one of the things that I think was really interesting in the strategies. So they didn't have as much money. They ran them really, really at the very last moment. And so the conservative groups focused on basically mischaracterizing the role of the Ohio Supreme Court to be one tough on crime. And the Ohioans for Judicial Integrity and Ohioans United for Public Education, they ended up just at the very last minute spending money. And, one of the things that is so challenging is that these Supreme Court races that really should be about, well, what is it we want in our justice system, really came down to an arms race. And so it's my hope as we move forward that this kind of project where we're educating people about the political ads will help inoculate some of the role of money in politics. So that's a little bit about what we did with the Judge the Ads. And, I think, as we move into this new year, we're going to need to be thinking about, well, what is it that we want when it comes to our courts, and how can we actually get there? Because of course, we have 3 branches and there are attacks on all of them. And with that, Kelly, are you ready for lame duck?
Can I jump in for 1 sec?
Oh, of course.
I just wanted to point out how, well, first of all, we did a webinar last week with a kind of a deep dive on this with experts on dark money, and that was really interesting, and we're happy to share that recording with you. But one thing that they pointed out is so many of these groups are funded by individual billionaire donors, and our system of government just wasn't built to withstand the weight of an individual billionaire donor who has everything. So what do you buy a billionaire for Christmas when he has everything? Well, how about a court? And that, these courts make decisions that directly impact their bottom line. It's not a stretch to see the connections. And the thing that Catherine was saying about, these kinds of attack ads about being soft on crime. Well, the Ohio Supreme Court doesn't make decisions about sentences for individual criminals. That's not the role of the court. They're doing things like deciding about, utility prices, taxation, whatever. So it's really hard for us to sustain these attacks that come from billionaires. And another thing that they mentioned that I thought was really interesting was that they often put the money in, these billionaires, right at the last minute. So you're talking about a couple of days before the election. And if somebody does an attack ad that's filled with mis and disinformation a couple of days before the election, it's extremely difficult to have the time or the resources to respond. So there's a whole tactic that's being used, a kind of a strategy, not just in Ohio, in many places across the country. And so we're ending up with the courts that we have. And of course, this is in conjunction with the change that our legislature made a couple of years ago, where they put a partisan label next to the Supreme Court and appellate court judges, but not the county and lower court judges. So that also had an enormous impact. So this is a really interesting project and something really unique that Common Cause does. And we definitely encourage you to check out the analysis of all the ads and, the kind of complex nature of how these different groups give to each other in order to be able to keep the money, a lot of the money hidden as to the ultimate source.
Well, and I did want to mention this, one of the things that we are hoping to do in the upcoming year is to do some additional educational videos about the courts. And so, one of the things that I'm hoping is that some of you will pitch in and think about, much like we work together on fair districts, that we think about, well, what are the kinds of activities, what are the ideas that y'all have percolating, so we can think about how to best educate the public, to engage people in reform efforts, because we're properly an oligarchy now, and we need to be thinking about what we can do to improve democracy and improve our courts. And with that, we're on to lame duck, aren't we?
I think so.
Oh, can we take much more this morning? I don't, we're really packing it in. But, I'm sure most of you are aware we are in lame duck session right now. And so this current General Assembly is working to wrap things up and put nice little bows on things. And sometimes they're bows before they're even wrapped, because they're just like throwing stuff together. And we have a couple of those cases. That we're seeing with election bills. Unfortunately, there is a Senate Bill 324 that was introduced the day after Election Day. So that was nice. And it's a comprehensive bill that Teresa Gavarone is sponsoring. It requires citizenship proof to register, but it also revises the election laws in lots of different ways. And so banning drop boxes would be one, creating different provisional and absentee process where, absentee ballots would need to be hand-delivered to election officials. Also, a lot of petition circulator regulation changes and new procedures for processing petitions, creating a committee agent for the petition process. I haven't seen a fiscal analysis on any of this. We don't really understand how it would all work. We just know it's there for us to review. There was another comprehensive elections bill. It was much more involved in the spring, similar to House Bill 472. They looks like they may have whittled some of it down and then worked into these bills. But there was also House Bill 552, which did exist previously and earlier in the year, but did receive a sub bill this past Wednesday, last Wednesday, to completely it just really, in strange ways, create a lot more onus on the election officials, procedural updates that really don't seem possible, but doubles down on the citizenship proof at voter registration, creating a process where the Secretary of State needs monthly updates to the boards of elections, and then those boards of elections have to check citizenship status along with voter registration rolls monthly, all the way to creating new systems for how they process voter registrations, how they use BMV data and citizenship data that they currently don't have access to. And so, you know, very problematic stuff. We do have a call to action. I don't know if we put it in there yet, but I'll stick it in there right now. So we do have a call to action when really we're just, you know, trying to get folks to tell lawmakers that election bills, along with so many other bills, should not be rushed like this. You know, they unfortunately neither bill has even had any feedback from the election officials themselves. So they've been busy working and are still working on the audit and all of the, you know, their audits and wrapping up the elections right now. And so it's just pretty problematic and unfortunate that, you know, this has to be where we are. There's also a link for other lame duck legislation that's being tracked, very comprehensive list. You know, so if there are other additional topics that you're interested in, you can find out ways that our coalition and, you know, voting advocate organizations are working to try and bring light to some of it, you know, follow it, attend hearings if we're able, and, you know, just be witness to the process that is lame duck. So happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to jump in here also. I just want to say, guys, if you see the stress level in Kelly, because she's actually trying to understand these bills and think what the boards of elections would have to do in order to actually comply with the law. The people that are writing these bills are just like, let's have everybody do this and let's do this and let's do this. And they're not paying any attention whatsoever to what that would actually require the boards of elections to do, how much money it would cost. The fact that half of our boards of elections are in very small counties where they may have 1 or 2 employees. And yet, you know, Frank LaRose is saying, I think it's actually weekly that they're supposed to send a report with the discrepancies between this and that. And, you know, they can't use a Dropbox. They have to stand outside and collect the ballots. These are things that are physically impossible, financially impossible, technologically impossible, you know, and yet we have these folks coming up and just putting them into these, they're kind of like Christmas tree bills for voter suppression. Everything we can possibly think of that would limit people's ability to vote and question people's vote, you know, the kind of exact match. Somebody wrote Bobby and didn't use their middle initial, and or, you know, those kinds of things that really don't serve a purpose other than to cast doubt on our election system. You know, and as Kelly mentioned, the boards of elections are still recovering from the last enormous election bill, which was, you know, almost 2 years ago at this point, 458, and the changes that were made there. And, you know, some of the, if you actually look at the minute processes that occur inside the Board of Elections, where the board is trying to determine, are we going to count this vote? Are we not going to count this vote? Well, the guidance isn't clear from 458. If a ballot arrives, and it used to be it had 10 days to arrive, now it has 4 days to arrive, and the post office is slow, but it wasn't postmarked, and it arrived on election day. Do we count it or do we not count it? These things have not been worked out yet, and this is from 458. And yet here we have this onslaught of additional changes that are being suggested. And so we feel that it's really important, first and foremost, that any new voting legislation be worked out in collaboration and consultation with the boards of elections officials, because they're the ones that actually know what is happening. So that is just so important. And I watched the hearing of 552, and you know, they asked, well, have you spoken to anyone at the Board of Elections? No, we haven't actually spoken to anyone at the Board of Elections. No, they haven't. So, you know, I think that the best approach we can have, these folks have a supermajority. They can pass anything they want to pass, but asking them, you know, to collaborate with the boards of elections and to just have some common sense, just slow down, just think about what the implications are, is the best that we can do right now.
Yeah, and I think, you know, along with them being really annoying, obnoxious, nuanced, problematic process bills, they're also very harmful to voters. And so, for example, 552 actually requires that the records you use to submit to verify your citizenship become public record. Well, that means passports. That means your citizenship documentation and your naturalization certificate. And so there are also very obvious things that are harmful to voters and problematic to people that are trying to protect voters and ensure that folks are able to vote in a free democracy without having to prove every step of the way who they are. And some of that has to be on the boards of elections and the Secretary of State. And then I guess like one of the other things I would say is that there are these bills are being brought by individuals that are working with some of the lawmakers that don't identify themselves as part of a group or an organization. They say, oh, I'm just a citizen working on behalf of XYZ, but we know that's not the case. And we've been tracking a lot of this information. We know who's involved. And like to answer Wenda's question, yes, the boards of elections, they do have a professional association, and they can and they do lobby for themselves. There's also a county commissioners professional association that also needs to be made aware of it. Unfortunately, the boards of elections have been running around like crazy since October trying to facilitate an election, and haven't come out and probably haven't even gotten together. I'm not going to say I can't speak for them, but I know that there was significant pushback in the spring. The boards were working in the spring to push back on 472 and the Senate version that mirrored that, because they were extreme overhauls of the whole system. It included decommissioning all the machines and a lot of tech and security stuff that's been pulled out of these things. So they're really focusing on and complementing the national narrative of proof of citizenship, even though we know that has not been it has not been an issue that warrants this level of action. So
one little anecdote. So some of I think you guys probably saw that, Frank LaRose was encouraging that prosecution of non-citizens who had registered to vote. And, there were all these cases, hundreds of cases, but it only boiled down to 6. And of those 6, one of them was actually a dead person. So there were only 5 people. But one thing that's really interesting is that fairly often, it seems, or at least in many of those cases, folks who are not citizens have registered by mistake. It doesn't mean that they've voted, that they've filled out a form and they weren't aware that they weren't supposed to. And in many cases, they've actually checked the box on the voter registration form that says they are not a citizen. And then that form is turned in. I don't know who's turning in those forms, because I can tell you, I would never, ever turn in a form where someone checked a box saying they were not a citizen. Someone turned in that form, and then the people who are entering the forms enter them, even though it says, check the box that they're not a citizen. So one suggestion that we have actually made is that they change the form, and that they have a big notice in the middle of the form in red in capital letters and in several languages saying, if you are not a citizen, do not fill out this form. It does seem a little unfair to have a form and then people fill it out and honestly say, sometimes when you're applying for benefits, there's a series of forms you fill out. You may not understand all of those forms and you just fill them out. And then here you are being prosecuted. And additionally, there are people who weren't citizens, and then they become naturalized. They become citizens, and then they're having to go through all sorts of hoops when they go to vote. They go to their citizenship ceremony, get sworn in as a new US citizen, they happily register to vote, and then they get sent threatening letters by the Secretary of State and are asked for additional ID when they go to vote. And this just seems really, really wrong. So these are things that we're looking into and hoping to have some positive in some countries, non-citizens can vote. Yes. I know. And that this was an idea that seemed like its time had come about 5 years ago. I think there was a bill even in New York. But right now the mood in the country, there's been this kind of flurry of scares, purposeful, kind of the whole, they're coming across the border and they're voting and all of that. It's, we have to fight back really hard to just, for kind of rational sense and reason, over here.
And both of these bills include a provision for a confirmation process for citizenship registration, right? So think about how a board of elections would need to go first try and verify the citizenship, say they get access to national, even state databases that they don't already have access to. We have security issues with that data anyways, but say they're able to check, then they're supposed to send out a couple notices. Excuse me. And if someone doesn't reply if those notices go unanswered in 552, it requires them being sent to the attorney general, not even county prosecutors, just like straight to the AG. And so there are just such extreme provisions in these bills that, I can't even explain the frustration because, right now they're sitting in a good situation where they have control and they could use it to help establish better procedures or, give the boards of elections the resources they need, but instead they're just really trying to complicate things further. Yes,
Sanford.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. What are your about the Ohio Organizing Collaboration's Voters' Bill of Rights that just received the ability to at least begin the process? Could it block some of the voter suppression legislation that we're talking about? And then my question: is there assistance that Common Cause and/or fair districts could provide to this collaboration of groups that could be done in exchange for their future support of some fair district efforts that we hope are going to happen? So I'll stop.
Well, thanks for highlighting that. One of the things that I've always been super grateful about is that we have this ability to go directly to the ballot, that we can collect signatures, we can truly organize and then have this opportunity to put issues before the ballot. And, I know that as we were thinking about this whole effort, I was imagining this as a 1-2 punch, right? That thing of like, okay, so first of all, you do what you can so you can create fair voting districts so that it makes our votes more meaningful. It makes, creates greater accountability, etc. And then, the next, direct democracy is then what you do is you improve voting so that, in fact, more folks are participating, you don't have the same kind of obstacles, and that, in fact, we would create a more flourishing democracy. Now, as we know, we got our butts kicked. And because of the way that the system essentially worked against us. So when we think about kind of the ballot board and the just incredibly terrible language that we have, I would imagine that it is unlikely that the ballot board would give terribly good language. And so one of the things that I'm really interested in is thinking through, well, how can we work together? How can we be successful? And that is why, we're in this process of trying to figure out where we're going next. Now, I'm really glad that the Ohio Voter Bill of Rights folks, so you mentioned the Ohio, I've got this wrong. OOC, there we go, Ohio Organizing Collaborative, that they've done, they've done some good work so that we now know that the title can't be an obstacle. We know some of those hurdles at the beginning, but it's not clear to me how we're going to get from signature collection through the get out the vote without just a tremendous challenge. So one of the things I'm hoping is that we can have more robust discussions in December and January. There is a countdown on, because of course it takes time to collect these signatures. But I am also very interested. I'm also very interested in how things will come together. What is a strategic way to move forward, and how we can build on the work with fair districts.
I just wanted to say, just so if folks don't know what you were referring to, the Voter Bill of Rights, that, there's a group that is wanting to put forward almost like the opposite of these voting bills, all the little small fixes to our voting system that would make it easier for voters, that would make better access. So automatic voter registration, which just means if you go to get your driver's license or you interact with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you're automatically registered or you're automatically updated. Permanent absentee, so you don't have to, if you ask for an absentee, you don't have to ask every time. More drop boxes, all the little things that would just make it easier, that exist in other states, nothing radical or strange. We do collaborate a lot of those folks, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, they collected a lot of signatures for Citizens Not Politicians. So we all work together a lot. But I think that the kind of shadow that was cast on us by the ballot language is something that may give others pause. There are several other ballot initiatives that are kind of in the initial stages right now. I read about one yesterday, which is basically guaranteeing equal rights for marriage equality, against discrimination against LGBTQ plus folks. There is one about ending qualified immunity for the police, and of course, in the background, there's, ranked choice voting is another topic that people care a lot about and that would be very positive for our democracy. But I think that the kind of power structure and the ballot board is just giving folks pause at the moment. But we'll see what happens.
I really had two questions and was hoping to ask the first question before the one that I just asked was the second question. But in August 2023, as we all know, we defeated an effort that would have, in essence, destroyed a citizens-led ballot initiative. What a great success. However, in 2024, as we know, Frank LaRose and Teresa Gavarone, their manipulation of the ballot language put in place an approach that in the future is either going to restrict or kill citizen-led ballot issues. That's where we sit today, at least my thoughts. So we are now faced with the challenge of needing to protect citizen-led ballot issues. A possible option is to establish an independent citizens ballot board. Okay, there's probably better options, but it almost seems like we have to protect citizen-led ballot issues and figure out what is our best next step to do that. It's hard to imagine doing more future ballot issues with what Teresa Gavarone and Frank LaRose just showed us they're capable of doing. Anyway, that was actually a question, but it's also my thoughts. So yeah.
Well, and I do think when we look at the ballot board, it is actually a reform. So it used to be that just the Secretary of State came up with the ballot language. And so, there was an effort to say, okay, we don't want to leave it just in the hands of one person who might use it in a political fashion. Let's create a committee to do this. And so the ballot board is actually a reform, but it is a reform that needs to be reformed because it is incredibly, incredibly broken. It is not clear to me at all, like how can we advance really big ideas unless we actually address the ballot board. Now that, and so, you know, a big campaign could be about, you know, let's actually improve the ballot board. Now, first we'd have to go through a process where we try to figure out, well, what are the reforms that we would want? I think it takes a while to think through, well, how do we do this in a way that could work, and makes good sense. But it is very unlikely that we can move a really big amendment with lots of moving parts, because you just imagine the ballot language you could get. Now, a very simple reform, I think that's different. There's only so much you can do if it's a simple, big idea. The ballot board can, it's the difference between, the reproductive rights amendment. All right, you're pro-choice or you're pro-life. It's a little bit easier to say, okay, hey, I'm for reproductive rights. I'm against reproductive rights, one or the other. And so an idea like an anti-discrimination effort might have some really wacky language or biased language, but it would be short, likely to be short and sweet, and people would be able to recognize that. But something where you have multiple layers of
Yeah.
election improvements, I could see a real challenge.
Yeah, good point.
There was a Michael Barron put in an interesting question about the I was going to talk about the Iowa plan. He put several different things in there. Senate Joint Resolution 5. Oh yeah, that's about initiated statutes. So as far as the DeWine Iowa plan, just one thing to keep in mind, folks. DeWine says that he's still in favor of putting forward some redistricting reform amendments that would be make us more similar to the Iowa plan. The bottom line about the Iowa plan is that at the very end, the legislators, the elected officials, get to make the decisions. So it doesn't really change anything. It still leaves the power in the hands of the folks who have a vested interest in the outcome. And I think that's the most important thing about the amendment that we were putting forward, was that it separates, it makes a absolute division between the people who seek to benefit from the way the maps are drawn, and takes that power away from them. So the Iowa plan leaves that power in their hands in the end. Initiated statutes. So the problem that we have with initiated statutes is that, so that's, instead of changing the Constitution by collecting signatures, you collect signatures in order to enact a bill. But the problem is that the legislature, you can pass that bill, you can have the voters go and say, yes, we want that, and it becomes law. And then the very next day, the legislature can overturn it or write a new law that overturns it, that undermines it. And so, we can reform that process, but unless there's what we call a safe harbor of some kind, where, you say, well, if the citizens pass an initiated statute that creates a new law, that can't be changed by the legislature for a year or 2 years or whatever period is. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be worth the effort to go out there and collect all those signatures. If you have no protection against the legislature just making those changes. But Catherine, do you have comments on that?
So I do know that there are times that folks have decided to do constitutional amendments rather than statutory initiatives. And let's take gaming in the state of Ohio. That was put in into the Ohio Constitution, including, you know, tracts of land where the casinos would be located, because they, you know, they just knew that they wouldn't have a safe harbor, and the minute it was over, it could be changed, and who knew what the legislature was actually going to do. And so our Constitution is little patched together because of the use of direct democracy to advance reforms that could actually, or changes that could actually go through the state legislature. On the other hand, if you think about, you know, the marijuana that was issued to 2023, how long it's taken the state legislature to do all the implementation, and you can see why it is that rather than waiting, it's moved into, you know, they move ahead and do a constitutional change. So a safe harbor could be really useful. The thing I worry about is, you know, is their idea a safe harbor a year or two? Or are they thinking 4? Because you need time for the implementation. It actually, like, what I would worry about is if you don't have no safe harbor, you kind of know what the rules are. If it's 2 years, is there enough time to implement it to see it in action before? Yes. So that's where, you know, Senator Lou Blessing's bill is 2 years, which is a really short period of time to implement, to ensure that there's, you know, what it actually means.
Wenda wanted to jump in.
Oh,
Yeah.
go for it, Wenda.
Hi there. Michael, I saw your comment about increasing the number of representatives. That probably wouldn't work because there's only a certain number of seats and offices and all that. It'd be too expensive. I dreamed up another plan that might work. And you guys are going to think I'm nuts, but I have studied ranked choice voting and all the different kinds of ranked choice voting. In my dreams, I decided that there would be 99 House representatives and 33 senators, and that each county would be given a certain amount. It didn't have to be equally distributed, but each county, the big ones, would be given more of those 99 or 33, or not the 33. Some of them would have to be joined for the 33. But on the county level, they would decide how to draw their districts in the county. And then here's the really weird part none of you are going to like, and nobody would ever go for, but it would work. Each representative would have, their vote would not count as one. Their vote might count as less than one or more than one, depending on the population that they represent. I'm sorry, I just wanted to throw out a really bizarre thing that would let the counties individually have their gerrymander fights and take it off the state plate. So Ohio Common Cause would be out of the business, not have to worry about it, and each county Common Cause would have to worry about it.
Well,
I mean,
we are the laboratories of democracy. So one of the things that I think is really important is that we, you know, we have opportunities for thinking about reforms. Now, do I think that Lou Blessing's idea of tiny districts is going to move, or is the best thing since sliced bread? No. But I do think, you know, it makes sense for all of us to be thinking about, well, what are the things that we could actually do that are ways where we could get people talking, where we could create a democracy that works for all of us. And I appreciated Wenda's idea, and I'm hoping that you know, as we go into 2025, that we've had a chance to reflect and to think. I was very moved. Syed Jones, somebody that you all are familiar with. He's he lives in Columbus, a poet, and a novelist. And one of the things he wrote about right before the election was if you know, and I am paraphrasing, but you know, that notion that if the world is on fire, we can take comfort in the fact that we are water. The world is on fire. We can take comfort in that we are water. And there are lots and lots of different ways that we can come together, we can organize, and the winter is a very good time for us to think about, well, where do we go next? And we can't immediately begin, you know, collecting more signatures on redistricting to address gerrymandering, but we can start our planning. And we have started real conversations about, well, where should we go? What is it that we actually want? And we can take our water and put it all together and cause a wave. Does anybody have other things that they would like to talk about, or something that you're like, I have this crazy idea, but I'd like to visit about it? Well, the other thing that I was hoping is that some of you would consider being on some of the study committees. I really need some help thinking about what to do. I mentioned the animated videos. I'm also interested in a real discussion, a real committee that looks at what the heck do we do about the ballot board? And how can we move forward? Mia, are there things that you were hoping that you could, you know, pick other people's brains on?
Well, I do love the kind of creative ideas that, you know, like the one that Wenda just shared, and other folks are sharing ideas about, you know, instead of having districts at all, we could just have a statewide vote and then allocate seats based on that kind of overall number, and then representatives wouldn't actually be tied to a particular district. So again, things that aren't likely to move forward, but kind of open up our thinking about approaches. You know, I think just sort of rethinking everything that we're doing. And I would say for me, in this period that's coming up that I know is going to be really challenging, one thing that I think is really important that we can do together is make sure that we know where the lines are so that we know when we're crossing them. You know, I don't want to end up being that frog in the pot where the water is getting warmer. I want to know, like, this is not okay. Even if I know this bill is going to pass, and even if I'm trying to limit the harm that it causes, that I'm able to say, no, this is actually what makes a functional democracy. This is what access to the ballot means. This is what true representation is. And so in a way, working together to kind of set our baseline of what it is that we know is important and that we're not willing to compromise on. I feel like that's something we could work on together, and that is, you know, so that instead of necessarily, maybe we aren't going to win this or that battle, but we're going to be a beacon for to support democracy and the things that we believe in, you know, transparency, and we can work on those things together.
Well, we have hit, you know, the hour, and I always think this is a very short time period. There are lots of ideas. I just wanted, you know, to really say how grateful I am to all of you. And I'm just going to encourage you, you'll get a follow-up email, but definitely if you have ideas, if you're like, hey, I would like to noodle on this particular idea with others, I'd like to spend some time discussing it and thinking through what might be the best approach, please send an email. I'm cturser@commoncause.org. And then the other thing is, Mia, I understand that there is a party that's coming up. Do you want to tell us about that?
Oh, yes, there is indeed a party. Nothing better than a party. December 14th, 2 to 4 p.m., we're having a thank you party for Fair Districts for all the volunteers, and everyone is welcome. If you didn't collect any signatures, you're still welcome. I will quickly look for the invitation and send it to you. Give me 1 second here. And it should be really fun. No agenda other than to just, have fun
I
and
think I
hang out.
got it. Sorry.
You
So
got
you
it?
don't-
Okay.
So you don't have to look.
Okay. I'm there. I got it. All right. Anyway, we hope to see you. There you go. Kelly beat me. And it should be really fun. Honestly, there's nothing we like more than hanging out with our Fair Districts volunteers, our Common Cause volunteers, all these folks who did so many amazing things for the past year and more, and much more. Sandy, we are indeed opposed to gerrymandering, 100%. Whether you voted yes or no, both sides were against gerrymandering. Ain't that the truth?
In 2005, which was the first kind of citizen initiative to address redistricting that I was involved in with Reform Ohio Now, you'd say gerrymandering and people would look at you like, what the heck? What are you talking about? Or, they'd be like, oh yeah, gerrymandering, 8th grade social studies, or like it. So the difference, like clearly, gerrymandering is the bad guy and people do get it. So, it is very clear. Yes, we have won a messaging campaign. And now we need to fight to get past the disinformation. All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you all. I have to tell you how grateful I am for you. And hopefully we'll see you in Columbus in December. I always like that we're able to get together this way, but wouldn't it be fun to see one another in person? And I would love to pick your brain. So please reach out.
Thank
Any
you so
final
much,
words from
everybody.
anybody? All right. A big thank you to you all. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.